And we're just going to continue on. And so now, Tom Gorman, 5 minutes. Again, the yellow card at 30 seconds, red at time's up. Thanks. And also, we've been asked if you could move closer to the mic because it's just not picking up voices.
Sorry, Mike, I'm not trying to take over here.
You tell me what to do, what to say. There are a lot of issues to address based on my opponent's position on prohibition, and I don't have time to do it all. I will tell you the Cato study is faulty, and we can talk about that. When you ask me questions, I'll be glad to do that. Prohibition, the information on prohibition is faulty as far as violent crime, and we can talk about that when you ask me a question. I do want to say one thing. You got to keep in mind, during prohibition, whether you liked it or not, alcohol use was reduced, consumption was reduced by 50% during a 12-year period of time. And that was a drug that everybody accepted. It was culturally acceptable, but it was reduced by 50%. Also, there's no argument if you legalize drugs, in which people seem to forget drug use will go up by 50%. So what does that mean in real terms? We throw out stats and we say this many deaths and stuff like that. So let's put it in reality. Let me ask you a question. If, I know the number of you are upstairs drinking, I don't have a problem with alcohol. I have a problem with drunkenness, I don't have a problem with alcohol. But let me ask you a question. If I said that you will not be able to have a glass of wine when you have that nice steak at the restaurant, when you go to Coors and watch your Rockies play, you can't have a beer, when you eat your hot dog and have your peanuts, and when you go home at night you can't have a cocktail, but the trade-off is there'll be 5,000 more people alive every year if you're willing to do that. Would you be willing to do that? Some of you would be, yes, I'd be willing to sacrifice that freedom on behalf of others. Others of you will say, there's no way I want government to tell me what to do. I understand that. But let me ask you another question. How many of you have kids? How many of you have loved ones? How many of you have spouses? Okay, well, let me ask you a question. You're driving down 6th Avenue, hit Lincoln, a drunk broadside you, right? You look over the side and there's your kid right next to you. And you see the car crash and you see blood coming out of the face, cuts on their forehead, you hear this moaning, and they're trapped in a car. So you panic. The EMTs come, they use their life jaws, they get your kid out of the car, they start administering first aid, they take him to the hospital, take him to St. Joseph, into emergency, they rush him up into surgery. You're waiting outside, you can't go into surgery, you're waiting outside, okay? So you do that and you're waiting. What are you feeling? You're hurt, you're crying, you're praying. Even if you're praying to God, please help my son, help my daughter, okay? The doctor comes out, looks at you, and you know when he comes out of the surgery room, what he's going to say, I'm sorry, that little girl, that little boy that you had all the hopes for, you're not going to see him playing soccer on Saturdays. You're not going to watch him at their little game because your child's gone, okay? Now, you get a call, you're at work, you get a call and say, your wife, your husband, you got to get down to Swedish hospital. They've been in a wreck. Some drunk hit them head on, and they're in a hospital, and they're in surgery. You run down there, what's going on in your heart? So you go in there, and you're waiting, and you're waiting, and you're waiting. The doctor comes out and says, I've got some good news for you. I've saved your spouse's life. Your wife is going to be alive. Your husband's going to be alive, but they'll be paraplegics for the rest of their life. They'll never be the same. All the dreams you had of going to Hawaii for a vacation, all that is gone. Okay? That's real life stuff, people. Real life stuff, because that happens 30 times a day. That's just people that are killed, not counting the hundreds of thousands of people that are injured and maimed because of that. Now, if I told you I could prevent that from happening, if you give up that glass of wine, if you give up that beer at Coors, if you give up that cocktail, would you be able to do that to save your daughter, your son, or your spouse? And you know what? Your answer is going to be yes. It's got to be yes if you care at all. And that's happening every day. 11,000 times a year that scene takes place. And when you're a cop and you're the first responder and you're dealing with that on a daily basis, it can't help help to say, yeah, I don't want this. If we can reduce alcohol, drunk driving by 50%, I'm all in favor. And the same thing with drugs. If we legalize drugs, you're going to increase all that by 50%. I don't think it's worth it, because you're talking about real human lives. And that's where you got to get away from the statistics. Think about your family. And I don't want my family driving around with a bunch of people looking. And already, most of it, 38% of all your fatalities are now drug-related, as opposed to just alcohol. We don't need any more of that. What we need is less of that. So, thank you very much. And I will tell you, I believe in freedom, too. I believe in freedom for the victim. That's a freedom to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness without getting loaded. And I'll tell you something else. You know what? You ought to join with me and start pushing for sobriety. That would be good for our society. Sobriety with drugs, sobriety with alcohol. That's what we need. We don't need more people in there. Thank you.
Thanks, Tom. Jessica, 5 minutes.
I was going to be a lady and give up my 5 minutes, but then everybody on the panel is using theirs. So I'm going to try and make it quick, but, you know, I like to talk. With all due respect, that's a false analysis because, well, first, I hear these tragic stories, but there is something more compelling than the stories of victims like you presented. There is that compelling draw for freedom. And if I have to live in a world where I give up my rights, my obligations, my responsibilities, and the incredible joys of parenting to the government, to a faceless bureaucrat who doesn't know my kid, not going to do it. Not here. You can pry that birth certificate from my cold, dead hands. It ain't going to happen. Prohibition doesn't stop drunk driving. It doesn't stop drug use. Right now, in Carol Chambers' own jurisdiction, I represent an 18-year-old. Maybe we can talk after. Who made the horrific decision to get drunk behind the wheel of a car, and she T-boned somebody a couple months ago. And fortunately, nobody was injured. And I hope that I can help her realize the seriousness of this, and that this will change her life. But prohibition doesn't stop anybody. And as far as the rest of the analysis, it was 6 years ago this weekend that I took my 19-day-old daughter to Drugs Reservoir. And those of you who've had newborns know that they just sit there for the first 6 months and stare at you when you're not sleeping. And I had unbuckled my daughter from her car seat. We were on an incline that looks as flat as this round, and somehow she rolled out. We took her to the hospital. The first radiologist said she had head injury. She wasn't opening her eyes. She had head injuries, bleeding on the brain. They rushed us to Children's Hospital, where they had a bunch of surgeons waiting. My daughter wasn't going to make it. At least that's what I was thinking. Then the radiologist from Children's comes out and says, oh, well, whoever read this scan didn't realize that this was a baby's head, and that babies are born with fractures, so we can get through that lovely birth canal, won't go there, and that the brain bleeds a lot, and your baby's fine. It's just going to take her a couple days. Do I stop taking my kids to the mountains? Do I stop letting them walk to school? Do I stop letting them eat s'mores for dinner? I did that this week in my class. No, because freedom is that important. And as far as Dave's reference to the Cato Institute, those people are a bunch of dorks. But they do have a great saying, and it's the right, we agree on a lot, I'm sure. The right is all about keeping government out of the boardroom, and the left is for keeping government out of the bedroom. And we are for keeping government out of both. And one of the things about this growing movement and its inertia to say we're reclaiming our rights as citizens and our obligations as citizens of this great nation is that it can't be stopped. And I hope that we can use this issue as a catalyst to rethink the broader role of government in our lives.
Thank you. Carol Chambers?
You know, I have the great fortune of being married to a libertarian. And it is the interesting place where the left and the right meet. Because you both want the same thing for different reasons. one thing you should understand, though. Libertarians want less government. That means that you're free to use drugs, but they're not going to pay for your addiction treatment. They don't want to pay for your health care. Your choice to use drugs is your choice. The consequences are yours alone. Be good, healthy with those. And so, freedom is a different concept to each side. It's just something to consider. Right or wrong, I don't know. It's the same issue with helmets on motorcycles, seatbelts in a car. Should you have to wear a helmet? Should you have the right not to wear a helmet? Sure. But do we then have to pay for the medical care when you have a close head injury? That's the debate. That's the balance that we end up with when we have one-size-fits-all government. Where do we come down on the fiscal issue alone? This is about money. Or is it about human life? Is it about leaving people on their own? If you are addicted to methamphetamine and your kids are not being taken care of and you're not feeding yourself and you eventually kill yourself, that was your choice. That was your freedom. Is that what we want? And that's a question we all have to answer, and ultimately the majority decides. I have a study that was just sent to me today by the sheriff of Arapahoe County, and I think it disagrees a little bit with the Cato analysis. It says, this is from the National Criminal Justice Association. It is a study on the fiscal impact of drugs. It says illicit drug use costs the U.S. economy not $46 million, $193 billion a year, according to their study. And there's three areas where it costs us. It costs us with crime, and the criminal justice system and the enforcement is just part of that. It costs victims, and it has other costs associated with crime. It also costs us with health care, because there's addiction treatment, but there's also other health implications that come into play when you're dealing with drug use that are obvious. If you have somebody on methamphetamine, their dental care, their just general breakdown, body breakdown, when you use such a caustic abrasive drug that's made with stuff you put in your car, antifreeze. And then productivity, because they call it the virtue of incapacitation due to illness or lack of motivation due to illness and drug use. Whether it's legal or not, some drugs are still going to have that impact on people. Marijuana has that impact on some people, not all people. So I think, again, we try to use one-size-fits-all government, but there's such competing interests. By telling people they can't drive drunk, actually we've reduced drunk driving enormously because of Mothers Against Drunk Driving and because of increased penalties associated with drunk driving. Drunk driving is way down. So it does work. And, alcohol is legal, but violence associated with alcohol is just endemic. We have so much violence that is associated with alcohol. So legalizing alcohol does not change people's judgment or the use of violence. It's a major contributor to domestic violence. Almost, I'd say 95% of domestic violence we see has alcohol associated with it. So there's a cost-benefit analysis to be done. And again, my encouraging word to you is there's a thoughtful drug policy being developed based on research, based on advances in medical science. I think we get to a good place, but we base it solely on money. We consider the human cost, and that's something that as a society we have to decide.
Thank you. David, 5 minutes.
Thanks, Mike. The drug war can't be won. It can't be won. I'm going to tell you why when I see the red car. How when I see the red car. So I'm going to make you like a teaser in the radio. Carol talked about how libertarians were left and right meet, and there's a lot of truth to that, but as a quick point that gives me the opportunity to say to us, the libertarians, left and right are meaningless. It's not a useful way to think about things. The way to think about things is whether or not a policy gives the government more power or an individual more power. So it's about the state or the individual, not left versus right, because both the left and the right, on a given issue, want to take away your power. So we reject that as being meaningful at all. The state versus the individual on every policy can be analyzed in that way. Tom mentioned how smoking cigarettes in his original comments, how the use has been declining because of public attitudes. Absolutely right. Cigarettes are legal. The public attitudes are what's important. What Milton Friedman said, it's about persuasion and convincing people, not government force. Force doesn't convince anybody. It just forces them to act a certain way. Carol talked about how the war on drugs is a war on crime. Absolutely. Let's spend all the money we're spending on marijuana use and actually spend it on crime. Let's spend it on the domestic violence. Let's spend it on robberies. Spend it on murders. Carol and Tom both mentioned the horrors of drunk driving. Nobody's advocated, as far as I know, allowing drunk driving. If you want to drink in the basement of your mom's house and waste the weekend, great. But the minute you get in the car, now you become a public nuisance. And that has nothing to do with legalizing drugs. Tom asked if we would give up that glass of wine to save lives. Absolutely. But see, that's not what drug warriors are asking. Because they're not asking. They're not asking you to do anything. They are telling you what you have to do. And that distinction is crucial. Drug warriors assume, basically, I think it's basically true, that the only reason more people aren't hopped up on the goofballs is because of that government force. They think that we are all waiting to go out there and get some meth. But thank goodness the government said it's illegal, otherwise we'd be doing it. I have a higher opinion of humanity than that. Government is force. Think about that for a while. That's a concept a lot of people don't realize. Washington said, a guy who knew a little bit about government and a little bit about force, quoted, but it said, government is not reason, government is not eloquence, government is force. Government can't do anything without forcing you or threatening force against you if you don't comply with their laws. Is that the way to make society better, through force? Or is it through persuasion? Is it through living right? You know what? It's a lot harder to persuade them. It's a lot harder to live by example. Passing law is easy, comparatively. Now, how to win the drug war? Pat Buchanan, but you might not hear me quote favorably very often, said it very well in a Human Events article, March 6, 2009. There are two sure ways to end this war swiftly. Milton's way, Milton Friedman, who I quoted earlier. Milton's way and Mao's way. Mao Zedong's communists kill users and suppliers alike as social parasites. Milton Friedman's way is to decriminalize drugs and call off the war. Americans are never going to adopt the Maoist solution. And I said, thank God for that.